Hi, I'm Maya Chen, and 6 months ago, Dr. Richard Sullivan stood in front of our entire advanced business strategy class and told me my business plan was unrealistic, poorly researched, and frankly, embarrassing. He gave me an F and suggested I consider switching majors. What he didn't know was that 3 months later, I'd be standing in the university's executive boardroom, presenting that same embarrassing plan to the board of trustees, while he sat in the back corner, forced to watch every moment of my vindication. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of November 15th started like any other Tuesday at Northwestern State University. I woke up in my cramped dorm room at 6:30 a.m., the same time I'd been setting my alarm since freshman year. My roommate Sarah was already gone to her early chemistry lab, leaving behind the familiar scent of her vanilla body spray and the soft hum of our ancient mini-fridge. I pulled on my favorite navy blazer, the one my mom had bought me for my first day of business school 3 years ago, and grabbed my worn leather portfolio. Inside was my life's work for the past 4 months. A comprehensive business plan for EcoConnect, a platform I designed to bridge the gap between environmentally conscious college students and local sustainable businesses. I'd spent countless nights in the innovation lab, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled papers, refining every detail. The market research alone had taken me 6 weeks. I'd interviewed over 200 students across campus, surveyed 85 local business owners, and analyzed competitor data until my eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets. EcoConnect wasn't just another student project to me. It was my answer to the frustration I'd felt since arriving at Northwestern. Watching my environmentally passionate peers struggle to find meaningful work experience, while local eco-friendly businesses struggled to find reliable, enthusiastic help. The walk across campus to Hartwell Business Building was crisp and beautiful. Fall leaves crunched under my boots as I passed groups of students hurrying to their morning classes. The business building stood proud against the Chicago skyline, its modern glass facade reflecting the early sunlight. I'd walked through these doors hundreds of times, but today felt different. Today was presentation day in Dr. Sullivan's Advanced Business Strategy class, the capstone course that would largely determine our final grades and, for many of us, our post-graduation opportunities. Dr. Richard Sullivan was known throughout the business school as brilliant but brutal. He'd been teaching at Northwestern for 15 years, and his reputation preceded him into every classroom. Students either loved him for his real-world experience as a former Fortune 500 executive, or they feared him for his ruthless critique style that had reportedly made several students cry in class. I'd heard stories about his feedback sessions that were more like interrogations, where he'd tear apart business plans with surgical precision, leaving students questioning not just their work but their entire career aspirations. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, my heart beating steadily but confidently. I believed in EcoConnect. I believed in the research I'd conducted, the financial projections I'd calculated and recalculated, and the genuine need I'd identified in our community. The platform would allow students to browse opportunities at local sustainable businesses, from internships at organic farms to part-time positions at zero-waste shops. Businesses could post projects, offer mentorship opportunities, and access a pool of passionate young talent. It was elegant in its simplicity and powerful in its potential impact. Room 312 was already buzzing with nervous energy when I arrived. 22 of my classmates sat in the tiered lecture hall, laptops open, presentation slides ready. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the faint anxiety that always permeated the room before major presentations. Emma Thompson sat in the front row, her perfectly organized binder open to color-coded notes. Tyler Rodriguez was in his usual spot near the window, nervously adjusting his tie. Ashley Park had claimed a middle seat and was quietly rehearsing her opening lines under her breath. Dr. Sullivan entered precisely at 9 a.m., as he always did. He was a tall man in his mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see through any attempt at academic BS. He wore his standard uniform, a perfectly pressed white shirt, conservative tie, and an expression that suggested he'd already decided most of our presentations would disappoint him. He set his leather briefcase on the podium with a decisive thud and surveyed the room like a general inspecting troops before battle. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades making decisions that affected millions of dollars. "Today you'll present the business plans you've been developing all semester. These presentations represent 25% of your final grade in this course, and more importantly, they represent your ability to think strategically about real-world business challenges." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room like a heavy blanket. "I've arranged for several special guests to observe today's presentations. We have Dean Patricia Brooks from the business school, as well as 2 members of our board of trustees who've graciously agreed to provide feedback on your work. This is your opportunity to demonstrate the caliber of thinking we expect from Northwestern business graduates." My stomach fluttered slightly. I hadn't expected such a high-profile audience, but I reminded myself that this was actually perfect. If EcoConnect was as strong as I believed it was, having decision-makers in the room could only help. I glanced around and noticed 3 additional people had entered the room. Dean Brooks, a distinguished woman in her 40s whom I recognized from university events, and 2 other professionals I assumed were the board members. They took seats along the sidewall, notepads ready. "We'll proceed alphabetically by last name," Dr. Sullivan continued. "Ms. Chen, you'll be presenting fourth. Each presenter will have 12 minutes for their presentation, followed by 8 minutes of questions and feedback. I expect professional-level delivery and comprehensive responses to any questions posed." The first 3 presentations went smoothly. Emma Thompson presented a plan for a high-end fitness studio targeting young professionals. Her slides were polished, her delivery confident, and Dr. Sullivan nodded approvingly at her market analysis. Tyler Rodriguez proposed a food truck concept focusing on healthy late-night options for college students. His financial projections impressed the dean, who asked several follow-up questions about scalability. Ashley Park outlined a mobile app for connecting freelance tutors with students, complete with a sophisticated matching algorithm. Each presenter received constructive feedback. Dr. Sullivan pointed out areas for improvement, but his tone remained professional and encouraging. He praised Emma's attention to detail, complimented Tyler's innovative approach to a traditional market, and acknowledged Ashley's technical sophistication. The board members asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely engaged with each presentation. As my turn approached, I felt calm and prepared. I'd practiced my presentation dozens of times, refining my delivery until every transition felt natural. I knew my material inside and out. I'd anticipated potential questions and prepared detailed responses. My slides were clean and professional. My financial models were conservative but promising, and my passion for the project was genuine and evident. "Ms. Chen, you're up," Dr. Sullivan announced. I walked to the front of the room with confidence, connecting my laptop to the projection system. The title slide appeared on the screen: EcoConnect, Bridging Sustainable Business and Student Talent. I looked out at the audience, making eye contact with Dean Brooks, the board members, and my classmates. Everyone seemed attentive and ready to hear what I had to say. "Good morning," I began, my voice clear and strong. "How many of you have felt frustrated trying to find meaningful work experience that aligns with your values? How many local businesses do you think struggle to find reliable, passionate employees who share their commitment to sustainability?" I clicked to my next slide, revealing the results of my student survey. I interviewed 200 students across campus and found that 78% are actively seeking opportunities to work with environmentally responsible businesses, but only 23% knew how to find such opportunities. Meanwhile, 85% of the local sustainable businesses I surveyed reported difficulty finding young employees who genuinely care about their mission. Dr. Sullivan's expression was neutral, but I noticed him lean forward slightly. Dean Brooks was taking notes. I felt encouraged and continued with growing confidence. EcoConnect solves this problem by creating a dedicated platform where students can discover opportunities at local sustainable businesses, from internships at urban farms to part-time positions at eco-friendly startups. Businesses can... Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Post-projects. offer mentorship, and access a curated pool of environmentally conscious talent. I walked through my market analysis, explaining the size of the sustainability market among college students and the growth potential in the Chicago area. I detailed my competitive analysis, showing how EcoConnect would differentiate itself from generic job boards by focusing specifically on the intersection of student development and environmental responsibility. The revenue model is straightforward, I explained, clicking to my financial projections. We charge businesses a monthly subscription fee based on their size and hiring needs, from $49 per month for small businesses to $299 per month for larger organizations. Students use the platform for free, ensuring maximum participation. Our conservative projections show profitability by month 18, with potential for expansion to other university markets by year 3. I noticed several classmates nodding along, and Dean Brooks looked genuinely interested. The board members were actively taking notes and seemed engaged with my presentation. I felt like I was hitting all the right notes. The social impact potential is significant, I continued. EcoConnect doesn't just help students find jobs. It helps them develop careers aligned with their values while supporting local businesses that are working to create a more sustainable future. We're not just matching employers with employees. We're building a community of people committed to environmental responsibility. I clicked to my final slide, which outlined the next steps and my timeline for launch. I've already conducted pilot testing with 5 local businesses and 20 students. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, with 90% of participants saying they would actively use the platform once it launches. I'm seeking initial funding of $125,000 to develop the technology platform and begin marketing to our target users. I closed my laptop and looked out at the audience with a smile. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about EcoConnect. The room was quiet for a moment, and I interpreted this as thoughtful consideration of my presentation. Dean Brooks was still writing notes. One of the board members was flipping through his pages, presumably to formulate a question. I felt proud of my performance and confident that I'd effectively communicated both the business opportunity and my passion for the project. Then Dr. Sullivan stood up. His movement was deliberate and somehow ominous. He walked slowly from behind the podium to the center of the room, positioning himself directly in front of me. His expression had shifted from neutral to something I couldn't quite read, but it made my stomach tense. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice carrying a tone I hadn't heard him use with the previous presenters. "I have to say, this is one of the most disappointing presentations I've witnessed in my 15 years of teaching this course." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush hot, and I was suddenly aware of every eye in the room focused on me. My classmates looked shocked. Dean Brooks had stopped writing and was staring at Dr. Sullivan with what appeared to be surprise. "Your so-called market research is amateurish at best," he continued, his voice growing stronger and more cutting with each word. "Surveying students about their preferences is not market research. It's wishful thinking. You've fundamentally misunderstood the economics of small business operations. If you think local sustainable businesses have $49 per month to spend on recruitment platforms." I opened my mouth to respond, to explain the methodology behind my research, but he held up his hand to stop me. "Furthermore," he pressed on, "your competitive analysis completely ignores established players in the recruitment space. Do you really think LinkedIn, Indeed, and ZipRecruiter haven't considered this market? Your financial projections are based on fantasy rather than data. And your revenue model demonstrates a complete lack of understanding about customer acquisition costs in the digital marketplace." I felt like I was shrinking under his assault. The confidence I'd felt moments earlier was evaporating, replaced by confusion and humiliation. I glanced at Dean Brooks, hoping for some sign of support or disagreement with Dr. Sullivan's assessment, but her expression was carefully neutral. "But the most troubling aspect of this presentation," Dr. Sullivan continued, now pacing slightly as he spoke, "is that it represents exactly the kind of naive feel-good thinking that gives business education a bad reputation. You've taken a social cause you care about and dressed it up as a business opportunity without doing the hard work of understanding whether there's actually a viable market." He stopped pacing and faced me directly. "Ms. Chen, I'm giving your presentation an F. Not just because the business plan is unrealistic, but because it demonstrates a fundamental lack of business acumen that frankly makes me question whether you understand what we've been teaching in this course all semester. The room was completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Several of my classmates were looking down at their desks, unable to meet my eyes. The board members sat motionless, and I couldn't tell if they agreed with Dr. Sullivan's assessment or were simply shocked by the brutality of his feedback. "I would strongly encourage you to consider whether business is the right field for you," he added, returning to his position behind the podium. "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for students is to help them recognize when their skills might be better suited to other areas of study." I stood frozen at the front of the room, my laptop still connected to the projector, my presentation slides still visible on the screen behind me. I wanted to defend my work, to explain that he'd misunderstood key elements of my research, to point out that his criticism seemed disproportionately harsh compared to his feedback for other presenters. But my throat felt tight, and I couldn't trust my voice not to crack if I tried to speak. "Please take your seat, Ms. Chen," Dr. Sullivan said, already looking at his list for the next presenter. "Mr. Johnson, you're up next." I walked back to my seat on unsteady legs, disconnecting my laptop and closing it with hands that I hoped weren't visibly shaking. Jake Martinez, who sat next to me, leaned over and whispered, "That was completely unfair. Your presentation was solid," but his words felt distant and hollow against the weight of what had just happened. As the next presentation began, I sat in my chair trying to process what had occurred. I replayed Dr. Sullivan's criticism in my mind, trying to understand where I'd gone wrong. Had I really misunderstood the market so completely? Were my financial projections truly based on fantasy? Had I been naive to think that my passion for sustainability could translate into a viable business opportunity? The worst part wasn't the grade. The worst part was that it had happened in front of Dean Brooks and the board members, in front of my classmates who had just watched me get publicly eviscerated by one of the most respected professors in the business school. I felt like everyone in the room now saw me the way Dr. Sullivan had described me: naive, unrealistic, fundamentally lacking in business understanding. When class ended, most of my classmates filed out quickly, offering sympathetic looks but avoiding direct conversation. I packed my things slowly, hoping the room would empty so I wouldn't have to face anyone's pity or awkward attempts at consolation. As I was zipping up my portfolio, I noticed Dean Brooks approaching my desk. "Ms. Chen," she said quietly, "I'd like to speak with you in my office when you have a moment." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak coherently yet. She handed me her business card and left the room, followed by the board members, who didn't acknowledge me as they passed. Dr. Sullivan was erasing the whiteboard when I finally stood to leave. As I walked toward the door, he called out, "Miss Chen." I turned, hoping perhaps for some private explanation or acknowledgement that his public criticism had been overly harsh. "I want you to understand that my feedback comes from 15 years of watching students fail because they confused passion with business sense," he said, not looking up from the board. "I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to save you from wasting years pursuing something you're not equipped to handle." I left the room without responding, walking through the halls of Hartwell Business Building that had felt so familiar and welcoming just 2 hours earlier. Now the polished floors and motivational posters about entrepreneurship and innovation felt like they belonged to someone else's world, a world where I no longer belonged. I made it to the bathroom before the tears started. Standing in front of the mirror, looking at my reflection in the navy blazer my mother had bought me with such pride, I wondered if Dr. Sullivan was right. Maybe I had been naive. Maybe I had confused passion with business sense. Maybe I really didn't understand the fundamentals of building a viable company. But even as doubt clouded my thoughts, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something about his reaction didn't add up. The other presentations had received constructive criticism, professional feedback that helped the presenters improve their work. My déjà presentation had received something different, a complete character assassination that seemed designed not to educate, but to humiliate. I splashed cold water on my face, straightened my blazer, and decided that before I accepted Dr. Sullivan's assessment of my business acumen, I needed to understand exactly what had happened in that classroom, and why. The walk to Dean Brooks' office felt like a death march. Every step through the administrative wing of Hartwell Business Building reminded me of dreams I'd harbored since freshman year, dreams that now felt foolish and childish. The hallway was lined with photos of distinguished alumni, successful entrepreneurs who had started their journeys in these same classrooms. I wondered if any of them had ever been told they lacked fundamental business acumen by a professor who seemed to take pleasure in destroying student confidence. Dean Brooks' office was on the 4th floor, corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the campus quad. I'd only been inside once before, during my sophomore year when I'd received an academic achievement award. The space was impressive but welcoming, with rich mahogany furniture, built-in bookshelves filled with business texts and leadership memoirs, and several plants that somehow thrived despite the Chicago winter light. Her assistant gestured for me to take a seat in the waiting area. The leather chairs were comfortable, but I perched on the edge, my portfolio clutched in my lap like armor. Through the partially open door I could hear Dean Brooks on a phone call, her voice professional but warm, as she discussed budget allocations with someone from the university administration. 20 minutes passed before she emerged from her office, looking exactly as composed as she had during my presentation. Patricia Brooks was in her mid-40s, with prematurely silver hair that she wore in a sleek bob and intelligent dark eyes behind stylish glasses. She'd earned her MBA from Wharton before spending 10 years in corporate consulting, then transitioning to academia. Her reputation was that of someone who balanced academic rigor with real-world practicality. "Maya, thank you for waiting," she said, extending her hand. "Please, come in." Her office was even more impressive from the inside. Awards and commendations lined one wall, while another displayed photographs from various university events and conferences. Her desk was organized but not sterile, with stacks of papers that suggested someone deeply engaged in her work. She gestured for me to sit in one of the chairs facing her desk, then closed the door behind us. The click of the latch felt ominous, like we were about to have a conversation that required privacy. "I wanted to speak with you about what happened in Professor Sullivan's class this morning," she began, settling into her chair. "I've been thinking about your presentation and Dr. Sullivan's response, and I have some concerns." My heart sank. I'd hoped that perhaps she disagreed with his assessment, but it sounded like she was about to deliver more bad news about my academic performance or my future in the business program. "First, let me say that I found your presentation quite compelling," she continued, surprising me. "Your market research was thorough, your analysis was sound, and your passion for the project was evident. The business model you outlined showed genuine understanding of both the problem you're trying to solve and the economic realities of creating a sustainable venture." I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "But Dr. Sullivan said—" "I know what Dr. Sullivan said," she interrupted gently. "And that's part of what concerns me. His response to your presentation was disproportionate and, frankly, unprofessional. I've been observing his classes for several years as part of our standard faculty review process, and what I witnessed this morning was troubling." She leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. "Maya, can you think of any reason why Dr. Sullivan might have a particular bias against your work or your ideas?" The question caught me off guard. I thought back through the semester, trying to remember any interactions that might have set a negative tone. Dr. Sullivan had always been demanding, but I couldn't recall any specific conflicts or disagreements. "I don't think so," I said slowly. "I mean, he's always been tough on everyone, but this morning felt different. It felt personal." Dean Brooks nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "There's something you should know about Dr. Sullivan's background. Before coming to Northwestern, he spent 12 years as a vice president at Meridian Corp., one of the largest traditional staffing companies in the Midwest. They've been losing market share to digital platforms and niche recruitment services for the past 5 years. The implications hit me immediately. My EcoConnect platform was exactly the kind of innovative, technology-driven solution that was disrupting traditional staffing models. Dr. Sullivan's harsh reaction might not have been about the quality of my business plan at all. You think he saw my presentation as a threat to his former industry? I asked. I think Dr. Sullivan has become increasingly resistant to business models that challenge traditional approaches, she said carefully. And I think his feedback to you was colored by that bias rather than objective academic assessment. She opened a folder on her desk and pulled out several sheets of paper. I took extensive notes during your presentation, and I also spoke with both board members after class. Mr. David Kim was particularly impressed with your market analysis and asked me to pass along his contact information. He thinks EcoConnect addresses a real gap in the market. My mouth fell open. David Kim was a successful tech entrepreneur who had founded 2 companies and sat on multiple boards. The idea that he had been impressed with my work while Dr. Sullivan was tearing it apart felt surreal. Ms. Sarah Johnson also had positive feedback, Dean Brooks continued. She's been looking for innovative student ventures to support through her family foundation. Both board members were surprised by Dr. Sullivan's reaction and asked me to follow up with you directly. I felt like I was experiencing whiplash. 2 hours ago, I'd been told my business plan was embarrassing and unrealistic. Now I was learning that successful business leaders had found it impressive and worth supporting. But what about my grade? I asked. Dr. Sullivan gave me an F, and that's going to destroy my GPA. Dean Brooks smiled slightly. That's actually why I wanted to speak with you. There's something Dr. Sullivan doesn't know about the university's grading policies for capstone courses. When a presentation is observed by administration and board members, students have the right to request a secondary evaluation if they believe their grade doesn't reflect the quality of their work. She handed me a form from the folder on her desk. This is a petition for academic review. If you choose to file it, your presentation and business plan will be evaluated by a panel of 3 faculty members from different departments, none of whom have any connection to Dr. Sullivan. The panel's assessment will replace his grade entirely. I stared at the form, hardly believing what I was reading. There was a mechanism for challenging unfair grades that I'd never known existed. More importantly, there was a way to get an objective assessment of my work from professors who wouldn't have Dr. Sullivan's apparent bias against innovative business models. How often do students use this process? I asked. Rarely, she admitted. Most students don't know it exists, and it requires filing the petition within 72 hours of receiving the grade. But given the circumstances, and the fact that board members witnessed the evaluation, I think you have strong grounds for review. Dean Brooks leaned back in her chair, studying my face. There's something else you should consider, Maya. Every year, the university sponsors an innovation competition for student entrepreneurs. The winner receives $50,000 in funding, mentorship from successful alumni, and office space in our new innovation center for a full year. My heart started beating faster. This sounded like exactly the kind of opportunity I'd dreamed about, but never thought I'd be eligible for. The application deadline is in 6 weeks, she continued. Participants present their business plans to a panel of judges that includes successful entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and university administrators. It's completely separate from any coursework or grades, and it's designed to identify the most promising student ventures regardless of their academic performance. She pulled another packet from her folder and handed it to me. I think EcoConnect would be a strong candidate for this competition. Your research is solid, your market opportunity is real, and your passion is evident. More importantly, you'd be presenting to people who understand innovation rather than professors who might be resistant to new ideas. I flipped through the application packet, my mind racing. The competition was called the Northwestern Innovation Challenge, and past winners had gone on to secure additional funding, partnerships with major corporations, and successful business launches. This wasn't just about proving Dr. Sullivan wrong. This was about proving that my business idea had real merit in the actual marketplace. There's one more thing, Dean Brooks said, her tone becoming more confidential. Professor Lisa Wong in our entrepreneurship department has been following your work this semester. She's heard about EcoConnect through the student network, and she's been impressed with what she's learned. She's also one of the judges for the Innovation Challenge. Professor Wong was something of a legend in the business school. She'd founded 2 successful startups before transitioning to academia, and she was known for her mentorship of student entrepreneurs. The idea that she'd been following my work and was impressed by it felt like validation from someone who truly understood the entrepreneurial process. Would she be willing to mentor me through the competition process? I asked. I think she'd be very interested in working with you, Dean Brooks replied. She's particularly passionate about businesses that combine profit potential with social impact. EcoConnect fits perfectly with her areas of expertise. I sat in silence for a moment, trying to absorb everything she'd told me. An hour ago, I'd felt like my academic and professional future was in ruins. Now I was learning that there were multiple paths forward, opportunities I'd never known existed, and people in positions of authority who believed in my work. Dean Brooks, I said slowly, why are you telling me all this? Why are you going out of your way to help me? She smiled. And for the first time since I'd entered her office, her expression was purely warm rather than professional. Because I've been where you are, Maya. 25 years ago, I was a graduate student with what I thought was an innovative business idea. My advisor told me it would never work, that I was being naive about market realities. I let his assessment derail my confidence for years. She gestured toward one of the framed awards on her wall. That idea I was told would never work, it became the foundation for a consulting company that I eventually sold for 8 figures. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to be our mentors are actually the ones holding us back. The parallel to my own situation was striking. Here was someone who had experienced similar dismissal of her ideas and had gone on to achieve remarkable success. More importantly, she was in a position to ensure that I didn't have to face the same discouragement alone. I want you to file the petition for grade review, she said, returning to a more professional tone. I want you to apply for the Innovation Challenge. And I want you to schedule a meeting with Professor Wong as soon as possible. Don't let one professor's biased assessment derail your confidence in an idea that has genuine merit. I looked down at the forms in my lap, feeling a surge of determination that had been completely absent when I'd walked into her office. This wasn't over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. What about Dr. Sullivan? I asked. Won't this create problems with him if I challenge his grade and go around his class with the competition? Dean Brooks' expression became more serious. Dr. Sullivan is a faculty member, and like all faculty members, he's subject to the university's policies regarding fair and unbiased evaluation of student work. If he has a problem with you exercising your rights as a student, that's something the administration will address. There was something in her tone that suggested Dr. Sullivan's behavior that morning had created problems beyond just my grade. I got the impression that his response to my presentation might have consequences for him as well. One more thing, she added as I stood to leave. The board members who observed your presentation today have asked to be kept informed about your progress. They're genuinely interested in seeing how EcoConnect develops, regardless of what happens with your coursework. I walked out of Dean Brooks' office feeling like a completely different person than the one who had walked in. The forms in my portfolio felt like weapons, rather than bureaucratic hurdles. I had allies I hadn't known existed, opportunities I'd never considered, and most importantly, confirmation that my business idea had merit from people who understood the entrepreneurial landscape. The hallway that had felt like a gauntlet an hour earlier now felt like a pathway to possibility. I checked my phone and saw that I had 3 missed calls from my parents and several text messages from classmates asking if I was okay after Dr. Sullivan's brutal assessment. I decided to wait to return those calls until I had a clearer picture of my next steps. Instead, I walked directly to the student computer lab and opened my laptop. I had 3 tasks to complete before the day was over: file the petition for grade review, submit my application for the Innovation Challenge, and email Professor Wong to request a mentorship meeting. As I began typing the first form, I thought about Dr. Sullivan's parting words about saving me from wasting years pursuing something I wasn't equipped to handle. What he hadn't realized was that his attempt to crush my confidence had actually revealed opportunities I would never have discovered otherwise. The petition for academic review was straightforward but required detailed documentation of my concerns about the grading process. I carefully outlined the disparity between Dr. Sullivan's assessment and the positive feedback from board members, the apparent conflict of interest related to his background in traditional staffing, and the disproportionate nature of his criticism compared to other presentations. Writing out the details of what had happened helped me see the situation more clearly. Dr. Sullivan's reaction hadn't been about the quality of my work. It had been about his own discomfort with innovation that threatened industries he'd been part of. Understanding this distinction was crucial, because it meant the problem wasn't with my business acumen or my idea, but with his ability to evaluate them objectively. The Innovation Challenge application was more complex, requiring a comprehensive business plan, financial projections, and a detailed implementation timeline. Fortunately, I had most of this material already prepared from my presentation, though I would need to expand and refine it significantly to meet the competition's standards. As I worked through the application requirements, I realized that the challenge would force me to develop EcoConnect far beyond what I'd presented in class. I would need to create detailed marketing strategies, operational plans, and partnership agreements. The process itself would make my business plan stronger and more viable. By the time I finished the initial applications, it was nearly 6 p.m., and the computer lab was almost empty. My phone showed several more missed calls and messages, but I felt ready to face those conversations now. I had a plan, I had support, and most importantly, I had renewed confidence in my ability to turn EcoConnect from an academic project into a real business venture. Walking across campus in the early evening light, I thought about how much had changed in a single day. This morning I'd been a student hoping to impress a professor with a class presentation. Tonight I was an entrepreneur preparing to compete for real funding and recognition in the actual marketplace. Dr. Sullivan had tried to end my business aspirations with his harsh assessment, but he had inadvertently launched them instead. By tomorrow, I would have filed the paperwork that would lead to objective evaluation of my work, initiated the process that could provide substantial funding for EcoConnect, and connected with mentors who understood innovation rather than feared it. The irony wasn't lost on me. His attempt to humiliate me in front of the dean and board members had actually brought my work to their attention in a way that a normal class presentation never could have. Sometimes the biggest obstacles create the most unexpected opportunities, and I was beginning to understand that Dr. Sullivan's opposition might turn out to be the best thing that could have happened to EcoConnect. As I reached my dorm, I finally returned my parents' calls. They had heard the worry in my voice when I'd texted them earlier about having a difficult day, and they were eager to know what had happened. For the first time since leaving Dr. Sullivan's classroom, I was excited to tell that story, because now it had a very different ending than the one he had written for me. Professor Lisa Wong's office was nothing like Dr. Sullivan's sterile, intimidating space. Located in the Innovation Center, a newly renovated building on the east side of campus, her office walls were covered with colorful sticky notes, whiteboard sketches of business models, and photographs from startup events around Chicago. The energy was creative and collaborative, rather than hierarchical and judgmental. When I knocked on her door at 8 a.m. the following Wednesday, she greeted me with a warm smile and a cup of coffee already waiting on her desk. "Maya, I've been looking forward to this conversation," she said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the comfortable chairs arranged around a small conference table. "Dean Brooks told me about your presentation and what happened afterward. I have to say, I'm intrigued by EcoConnect and frankly appalled by how you were treated." Professor Wong was younger than I'd expected, probably in her late 30s, with an energy that suggested someone who thrived on innovation rather than tradition. She wore jeans and a Northwestern sweatshirt, looking more like a successful entrepreneur visiting campus than a tenured professor. Her reputation preceded her, but meeting her in person, I could see why students considered her approachable, despite her impressive credentials. "I've been doing some research on your idea since Dean Brooks mentioned it," she continued, pulling out a folder filled with printed articles and handwritten notes. "The sustainable employment market is exploding, particularly among Generation Z. Your timing couldn't be better." She spread several industry reports across the table between us. The data was compelling and validated everything I'd discovered in my own research. The sustainable business sector was growing at 15% annually. College students were increasingly prioritizing values-driven career choices, and traditional recruitment platforms were failing to serve niche markets effectively. "What I find most interesting about EcoConnect," Professor Wong said, leaning forward with genuine enthusiasm, is that you're not just matching job seekers with employers, you're creating a community around shared values. That's much harder to replicate than a simple marketplace model. I felt a surge of validation. Here was someone who immediately understood the deeper value proposition that Dr. Sullivan had dismissed as naive idealism. Professor Wong saw EcoConnect the way I saw it, not just as a business opportunity, but as a platform for connecting people who wanted to build a more sustainable future. "Tell me about your pilot testing," she said. "Dean Brooks mentioned you'd already started working with local businesses and students." I opened my portfolio and pulled out the feedback forms and usage data I'd collected over the past 2 months. I partnered with 5 businesses initially. Greenleaf Cafe, which sources exclusively from local organic farms; Solar Tech Solutions, a renewable energy startup; Recycle Right, a zero-waste consulting firm; EcoThreads, a sustainable clothing boutique; and Urban Roots, an indoor farming company. Professor Wong examined the data carefully, asking detailed questions about user engagement, business owner satisfaction, and the challenges I'd encountered during the pilot phase. Her questions were probing but supportive, designed to help me think through problems rather than criticize my approach. "The retention rate is impressive," she noted, pointing to a chart showing that 85% of students who used the pilot platform had returned within 2 weeks to check for new opportunities. "That suggests you're solving a real problem, not just creating a novelty service." I explained how I'd recruited 20 students initially through social media posts in environmental groups and sustainability clubs. The diversity of the user base had surprised me. Engineering students interested in clean technology, business majors passionate about social entrepreneurship, liberal arts students seeking meaningful work experience, and even graduate students looking for research opportunities with sustainability-focused organizations. The most valuable feedback came from the businesses, I told Professor Wong. They were struggling not just with finding employees, but with finding employees who genuinely cared about their mission. Traditional job boards brought them applicants who were just looking for any work, but EcoConnect connected them with people who chose to apply specifically because of the company's environmental focus. Professor Wong nodded thoughtfully. "That's the community aspect I mentioned. You're creating selection effects that benefit both sides of the marketplace. Students self-select for values alignment, and businesses get more committed employees." She pulled out her laptop and began taking notes as we talked. "I want to help you develop this for the Innovation Challenge, but I also think we should consider longer-term strategy. EcoConnect has the potential to scale beyond Northwestern, beyond Chicago, maybe even beyond higher education entirely." The conversation shifted to the technical aspects of building the platform. Professor Wong had extensive experience with digital business models, and she helped me think through user interface design, data analytics, and scalability challenges I hadn't fully considered. "You'll need to decide whether to build the technology in-house or partner with an existing platform," she explained. "Both approaches have advantages. Building in-house gives you complete control, but requires significant technical expertise and capital. Partnering is faster and cheaper but limits your flexibility." She introduced me to the concept of minimum viable product development, explaining how successful startups launched with basic functionality and improved their platforms based on user feedback. This approach would allow me to test EcoConnect with real users, while minimizing initial development costs. For the Innovation Challenge, I recommend focusing on a detailed implementation plan rather than trying to build the entire platform, she advised. The judges want to see that you understand the complexities of execution, not just the appeal of the concept. Over the next 2 hours, Professor Wong helped me outline a comprehensive strategy for developing EcoConnect into a competition-ready business plan. We discussed marketing approaches, partnership opportunities, potential investors, and competitive positioning. By the time our meeting ended, I had a clear roadmap for the next 6 weeks of preparation. "I want to introduce you to some people," she said as I packed up my materials. "There are entrepreneurs in the Chicago sustainability space who could provide valuable feedback on your business model. There are also Northwestern alumni who've been successful with platform businesses who might be willing to mentor you." She handed me a list of names and contact information. "Additionally, I think you should attend the Chicago Sustainable Business Network meeting next week. It's a monthly gathering of local business owners, investors, and entrepreneurs focused on environmental initiatives. You'll learn a lot about the market you're trying to serve, The idea of attending a professional networking event felt intimidating, but I recognized the opportunity to gather more market intelligence and potentially identify early customers or partners for EcoConnect. As I left Professor Wong's office, I felt energized in a way I hadn't since before Dr. Sullivan's devastating critique. Here was someone who not only believed in my business idea but was actively helping me develop it into something stronger and more viable. The contrast with Dr. Sullivan's approach was stark. Where he had tried to tear down my confidence, she was building up my capabilities. That afternoon, I received an email that made me pause in the middle of the library. It was from Jake Martinez, my classmate who had whispered supportive words after Dr. Sullivan's attack. The subject line read, "You need to see this." I opened the message to find a forwarded email thread that Jake had somehow obtained. The original message was from Dr. Sullivan to another faculty member, sent just 2 hours after our presentations. The content made my stomach drop. The Chen presentation today confirmed my concerns about the direction of business education. Dr. Sullivan had written, "Students are being encouraged to pursue feel-good social ventures instead of learning fundamental business principles. This kind of naive idealism does them no favors in the real marketplace." I made sure to provide a reality check that will hopefully redirect her toward more practical pursuits. The response from the other faculty member was equally troubling. "I agree that we need to maintain academic rigor, but public humiliation seems counterproductive. Perhaps private feedback would have been more appropriate?" Dr. Sullivan's reply was brief but revealing, quote, "Sometimes shock therapy is necessary. Better to crush unrealistic dreams in the classroom than watch them fail in the real world." I stared at the screen, feeling a mixture of anger and vindication. Here was proof that Dr. Sullivan's reaction hadn't been about academic assessment at all. He had deliberately set out to humiliate me because he disagreed with the type of business I was proposing. His critique hadn't been designed to help me improve my work. It had been designed to discourage me from pursuing innovative ideas entirely. Jake's follow-up message explained how he'd obtained the emails. "I work part-time in the IT department. These came through the faculty server, and I thought you should know what he was really thinking. This isn't about your business plan being bad. This is about him having an agenda." I immediately forwarded the email thread to Dean Brooks with a note explaining how I'd received it. If I was going to challenge Dr. Sullivan's grade through the formal review process, this evidence of bias would be crucial to my case. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. I spent every free moment refining my Innovation Challenge application, incorporating Professor Wong's feedback and expanding my research. The pilot testing data became more detailed as I surveyed participants about specific features they wanted to see in the full platform. I also reached out to the contacts Professor Wong had provided. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Maria Rodriguez, founder of a sustainable packaging startup, agreed to meet for coffee and provide feedback on my business model. David Chen, no relation, who had built and sold a Feifush, successful recruitment platform, offered to review my technical architecture plans. Sarah Kim, an environmental attorney who specialized in green business certification, volunteered to help me understand regulatory considerations. Each conversation taught me something new about the challenges and opportunities in the sustainable business space. More importantly, each conversation reinforced that EcoConnect addressed real problems that existing solutions weren't solving effectively. The Chicago Sustainable Business Network meeting was held in a co-working space in River North, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and large windows overlooking the city. I arrived early, nervous about networking with experienced professionals, but determined to learn as much as possible about the market I was trying to enter. The gathering was smaller and more informal than I'd expected, with about 40 people ranging from recent college graduates to seasoned entrepreneurs. The energy was collaborative rather than competitive, with genuine interest in supporting each other's sustainability initiatives. During the networking portion of the evening, I found myself in conversation with Rosa DeLuca, owner of 3 sustainable cafes in the Chicago area. When I mentioned EcoConnect, her face lit up with interest. "This is exactly what we need," she said enthusiastically. "I've been trying to hire college students who actually care about sustainability, but the traditional job boards just bring me people who see food service as a temporary paycheck. I want employees who understand our mission and can communicate it to customers." Rose's feedback was invaluable because it came from the perspective of a business owner who would be paying for EcoConnect services. She helped me understand pricing sensitivity, the hiring challenges specific to small businesses, and the features that would be most valuable from an employer perspective. "You should talk to Michael Torres," she suggested, pointing toward a man in his 50s who was deep in conversation with several younger entrepreneurs. He runs a sustainable investing fund and is always looking for innovative business models to support. The introduction to Michael Torres led to one of the most encouraging conversations I'd had since beginning work on EcoConnect. As someone who evaluated sustainability-focused businesses for investment potential, he immediately grasped both the market opportunity and the competitive advantages of my platform approach. "The key insight is community curation," he explained as we talked over drinks after the formal presentation ended. "Anyone can build a job board, but creating a community of users who share values and goals is much harder to replicate. That's what will make EcoConnect defensible against larger competitors." He asked detailed questions about my growth strategy, customer acquisition costs, and scalability plans. His questions were challenging but constructive, helping me think through aspects of the business I hadn't fully considered. "I'd like to stay connected as you develop this further," he said, handing me his business card. "My fund is particularly interested in early-stage companies that combine strong business fundamentals with measurable social impact. EcoConnect could be exactly the kind of investment we're looking for." Walking back to campus that night, I felt like I was living in a different world than the one I'd inhabited a week earlier. A week ago, I'd been a student whose professor had told her she lacked business acumen. Tonight, I was an entrepreneur who had received encouraging feedback from successful business owners and potential investors. The contrast with Dr. Sullivan's assessment couldn't have been starker. The people who were actually working in the sustainability and entrepreneurship space saw exactly what he had missed. EcoConnect wasn't naive idealism dressed up as business strategy. It was a practical solution to real problems that existing players in the market weren't addressing effectively. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into developing the most comprehensive business plan I'd ever created. Professor Wong met with me twice weekly, reviewing each section and helping me anticipate questions the Innovation Challenge judges might ask. Her feedback was detailed and demanding, but always constructive. "You need to be more specific about your competitive differentiation," she noted during one of our sessions. "It's not enough to say you're different from LinkedIn or Indeed. You need to explain exactly why businesses will pay for your platform instead of using free alternatives." We worked through detailed financial projections, including conservative and optimistic scenarios for user growth, revenue expansion, and market penetration. The numbers were encouraging but required careful justification based on comparable businesses and market research. I also spent considerable time developing partnerships with local businesses who were willing to serve as early customers for the full EcoConnect platform. These partnerships provided credibility for my business plan and demonstrated real demand from paying customers. The most valuable partnership was with Urban Roots, the indoor farming company from my pilot testing. Their founder, Jennifer Walsh, was so impressed with the quality of students EcoConnect had connected her with that she agreed to serve as a reference customer and provide a written testimonial for my Innovation Challenge application. EcoConnect didn't just help us find employees, her testimonial read. It helped us find team members who genuinely believe in sustainable agriculture and can communicate that passion to our customers. The difference in quality compared to traditional recruitment has been remarkable. As the Innovation Challenge deadline approached, I realized that my business plan had evolved far beyond what I'd presented in Dr. Sullivan's class. The feedback from Professor Wong, the insights from networking events, and the validation from real customers had transformed EcoConnect from an academic exercise into a genuine business opportunity. The final application package was comprehensive: a 25-page business plan, detailed financial projections, market analysis, competitive assessment, implementation timeline, and supporting materials including customer testimonials and letters of support from potential partners. More importantly, I felt confident in my ability to defend every aspect of the plan. The weeks of preparation had given me deep expertise in the sustainable employment market, clear understanding of the technical requirements for building the platform, and genuine excitement about the business opportunity. The night before submitting my application, I reviewed the email thread Jake had forwarded from Dr. Sullivan. His comment about providing a reality check and crushing unrealistic dreams felt almost quaint now. The reality check had come from the marketplace itself, from business owners and investors who understood innovation, and their assessment had been overwhelmingly positive. Dr. Sullivan had tried to end my entrepreneurial aspirations with his harsh critique, but he had inadvertently strengthened them instead. His attempt to humiliate me had forced me to seek feedback from people who actually understood the business I was trying to build, and their support had been far more valuable than his approval ever could have been. As I uploaded my Innovation Challenge application, I thought about how much I'd learned in just 6 weeks. I'd discovered a network of entrepreneurs and mentors I never knew existed. I'd validated my business concept with real customers and potential investors. I'd developed technical and strategic skills that would serve me regardless of whether EcoConnect succeeded. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own judgment about business opportunities, rather than deferring to authority figures who might have their own biases and limitations. Dr. Sullivan's assessment had been wrong not because he was a bad person, but because he was evaluating my work through the lens of his own experience and preferences rather than objective market criteria. The Innovation Challenge would be decided by judges who understood innovation and entrepreneurship. For the first time since that humiliating morning in Dr. Sullivan's classroom, I was excited to present EcoConnect to an audience that would evaluate it on its merits, rather than their preconceptions about what constituted legitimate business education. Whatever happened next, I knew that Dr. Sullivan's attempt to crush my confidence had backfired completely. I was more committed to EcoConnect than ever, better prepared to defend it, and surrounded by supporters who believed in both the business opportunity and my ability to execute it successfully. The Innovation Challenge presentation day arrived on a crisp February morning, with the kind of energy that makes ambitious people feel like anything is possible. The venue was the newly renovated Alumni Hall, a stunning space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan and state-of-the-art audiovisual equipment that made even student presentations feel like corporate keynotes. When I walked through the doors at 7 a.m. for sound checks and setup, the space was already buzzing with nervous excitement from the 12 finalists who had made it through the initial application round. I had spent the previous night doing final rehearsals with Professor Wong, who had become more than just a mentor over the past 2 months. She had pushed me to refine every aspect of my presentation, from the opening hook, to the financial projections, to the way I handled potential objections from the judges. By the time we finished our last practice session, I felt as prepared as I'd ever been for anything in my academic career. The other finalists were impressive, representing the full spectrum of student innovation at Northwestern. There was Marcus Williams, a computer science major who had developed an AI-powered tutoring platform that personalized learning for students with disabilities. Sarah Kim had created a food waste reduction app that connected restaurants with local food banks. David Rodriguez proposed a blockchain-based system for verifying sustainable supply chains. Each presenter had 15 minutes to make their case, followed by 10 minutes of questions from the judges. The judging panel was exactly the kind of audience I had hoped for when I first conceived EcoConnect. The 5 judges included Rebecca Martinez, a venture capitalist who specialized in early-stage technology companies; James Chen, founder of 3 successful startups who now served as a mentor to emerging entrepreneurs; Dr. Patricia Williams, director of Northwestern's Innovation Center; Michael Thompson, a senior executive from a major sustainability consulting firm; and most encouragingly, Professor Lisa Wong, whose presence meant at least one judge already understood the value proposition I was presenting. What I hadn't expected was to see Dr. Sullivan enter the hall 20 minutes before presentations began. He took a seat in the back row, notepad in hand, with the expression of someone who was there for professional obligation rather than genuine interest. The sight of him made my stomach tighten, but I reminded myself that he wasn't a judge, and his opinion no longer mattered for the outcome I was seeking. Dean Brooks had also arrived early and was chatting with several Board of Trustees members who had come to observe the competition. I recognized David Kim and Sarah Johnson from my original presentation disaster, and seeing them again reminded me how far my understanding of EcoConnect had evolved since that humiliating morning in Dr. Sullivan's classroom. The presentations began at 9 a.m. sharp, and I was scheduled to present fifth right after the morning break. I watched the first 4 presenters with genuine interest, taking notes on their presentation styles and the types of questions the judges asked. The quality was uniformly high, and I realized that advancing to the finalist round had been a significant achievement in itself. Marcus Williams delivered a polished presentation about his AI tutoring platform, complete with demonstration videos and testimonials from students who had used the prototype. The judges were impressed with his technical sophistication and asked detailed questions about scalability and market potential. Sarah Kim's food waste app had compelling social impact metrics and partnerships with major restaurant chains already in place. Her presentation was confident and data-driven, exactly the kind of approach that appealed to experienced business evaluators. During the break, I found myself in conversation with several other finalists who were curious about EcoConnect. The entrepreneurship community at Northwestern was small enough that most of us knew each other by reputation, but the competition had brought together students from across different schools and programs who might not otherwise have met. "I love the community aspect of your platform," said Jennifer Walsh, a graduate student in environmental science who was proposing a carbon offset marketplace for individual consumers. "That's so much harder to replicate than just building another job board." The validation from my peers felt good, but what really boosted my confidence was the conversation I had with Rebecca Martinez during the coffee break. She approached me directly, having recognized my name from the application materials she had reviewed as a judge. "I've been looking forward to your presentation," she told me with a smile that seemed genuinely enthusiastic rather than politely professional. "The sustainable employment space is really heating up, and I think your timing couldn't be better. I'm particularly interested in how you plan to address the chicken and egg problem that most marketplace businesses face." The chicken and egg problem was something Professor Wong and I had spent considerable time discussing. How do you attract businesses to post opportunities when there aren't many students on the platform yet? And how do you attract students when there aren't many opportunities posted? My solution involved strategic partnerships with established sustainability organizations and a carefully planned launch sequence that would build critical mass gradually. "I'd love to hear your thoughts on our approach," I replied, feeling confident enough to engage with her as a peer rather than as a student seeking approval from an authority figure. "We're planning to launch with a curated group of businesses and students rather than trying to scale immediately, which should allow us to prove the value proposition before expanding." When my turn finally arrived, I walked to the front of the hall with none of the nervousness I had felt presenting to Dr. Sullivan's class. The past 2 months had given me deep confidence in both my material and my ability to defend it. I connected my laptop to the projection system and looked out at an audience that included judges who understood innovation, business leaders who grasped market opportunity, and fellow students who appreciated creativity and ambition. "Good morning," I began, my voice clear and strong. "How many of you have felt frustrated trying to find work that aligns with your values? How many businesses do you know that struggle to find employees who genuinely care about their mission rather than just collecting a paycheck?" I clicked to my opening slide, which displayed the results of expanded market research I had conducted since submitting my initial application. The numbers were even more compelling than what I had presented to Dr. Sullivan's class, with data from over 500 student surveys and 150 business interviews across the Chicago metropolitan area. EcoConnect solves this problem by creating the first platform specifically designed to connect environmentally conscious students with sustainable businesses, building communities around shared values rather than just matching resumes with job descriptions. The presentation flowed smoothly through market analysis, competitive positioning, business model, and financial projections. I had incorporated every piece of feedback from Professor Wong, every insight from networking events, and every lesson learned from pilot testing with real customers. The business plan I was presenting bore only superficial resemblance to what Dr. Sullivan had so harshly criticized months earlier. When I reached the implementation timeline, I was able to point to concrete progress that had already been made. We've completed successful pilot testing with 8 local businesses and 45 students, achieving an 87% satisfaction rate from employers and 92% from job seekers. More importantly, we've secured written commitments from 12 businesses to serve as launch partners when the full platform goes live. The financial projections were conservative, but compelling, based on detailed analysis of comparable platforms and extensive market research. I had learned to present multiple scenarios rather than single-point estimates, acknowledging uncertainty while demonstrating thorough analysis of key variables. Our base case scenario projects break even by month 14, with the potential for expansion to other university markets by year 2, I explained, clicking through carefully constructed charts that showed revenue, costs, and user growth over a 3-year period. The optimistic scenario, based on faster adoption rates we observed during pilot testing, could achieve profitability by month 10. What I was most proud of was the section on social impact measurement. Working with Jennifer Walsh from the Environmental Science program, I had developed metrics for tracking the environmental benefits created by EcoConnect placements. We could measure carbon footprint reduction, waste diversion, renewable energy adoption, and other sustainability indicators that resulted from connecting passionate students with mission-driven businesses. EcoConnect isn't just a business opportunity, I concluded. It's a platform for accelerating the transition to a more sustainable economy by ensuring that environmentally responsible businesses have access to the talent they need to grow and scale. The presentation had taken exactly 14 minutes, leaving time for extended questions from the judges. I felt confident and prepared as Rebecca Martinez asked the first question. Maya, I'm impressed with your market research and pilot testing results, she began. Can you walk us through your customer acquisition strategy? How do you plan to scale from 12 launch partners to the hundreds of businesses you'll need for a viable marketplace? I had anticipated this question and had developed a detailed response based on conversations with business owners and marketing professionals. Our customer acquisition strategy focuses on 3 channels. First, partnerships with existing sustainability organizations like the Chicago Green Business Network, which gives us access to hundreds of pre-qualified businesses. Second, content marketing that positions EcoConnect as a thought leader in sustainable employment practices. Third, referral programs that incentivize our early customers to recommend the platform to other businesses. James Chen followed up with a technical question about platform architecture and scalability. I was able to discuss the technology stack I had researched with David Chen, the recruitment platform founder Professor Wong had introduced me to. The judges seemed impressed that I had thought through technical challenges, rather than treating them as implementation details to be figured out later. Dr. Williams asked about competitive threats from larger platforms like LinkedIn or Indeed. This was exactly the type of question Dr. Sullivan might have posed, but coming from someone who understood innovation rather than feared it, I was able to provide a thoughtful response about defensible competitive advantages and network effects. The key insight is that general-purpose platforms optimize for quantity, while EcoConnect optimizes for quality and values alignment, I explained. A business owner who posts on Indeed might get 200 applications from people who just need any job. A business owner who posts on EcoConnect gets 20 applications from people who specifically chose to apply because they believe in sustainable business practices. Michael Thompson, the sustainability consulting executive, asked the most challenging question about regulatory considerations and certification requirements for sustainable businesses. I was able to reference the research I had done with Sarah Kim, the environmental attorney, showing that I had considered legal and regulatory complexities rather than assuming they could be ignored. The 10-minute question period extended to nearly 15 minutes as the judges engaged with follow-up questions and clarifications. Rather than feeling like an interrogation, it felt like a business strategy discussion with experienced professionals who were genuinely interested in helping me think through challenges and opportunities. When the questions finally ended, I felt like I had delivered the best presentation of my academic career. More importantly, I felt like I had demonstrated that EcoConnect was a legitimate business opportunity, rather than student idealism dressed up as entrepreneurship. As I returned to my seat, I caught sight of Dr. Sullivan in the back row. He was writing notes, but his expression was unreadable. For a moment, I wondered what he was thinking about the presentation he had just witnessed, and whether he was beginning to reconsider his harsh assessment of my business acumen. The remaining presentations were equally strong, and I realized that winning the competition would require more than just a good business plan and polished delivery. The judges would need to believe that EcoConnect represented the best combination of market opportunity, execution capability, and potential impact among all the finalists. During the lunch break while the judges deliberated, I found myself in conversations with business leaders and board members who had observed the presentations. David Kim approached me with enthusiasm that seemed genuine rather than politely encouraging. "Your presentation was exceptional," he told me. "I remember your work from Dr. Sullivan's class, and the development since then has been remarkable. You've clearly put in serious work to understand your market and refine your business model. The reference to Dr. Sullivan's class brought back memories of that humiliating morning, but now it felt like ancient history. The person who had presented EcoConnect today was fundamentally different from the student who had been publicly criticized months earlier. I had more knowledge, better skills, deeper confidence, and most importantly, validation from people who actually understood the business I was trying to build. Sarah Johnson joined our conversation and mentioned that she had been following EcoConnect's development through Dean Brooks. "We've been impressed with your progress and the positive feedback you've received from local business owners," she said. "Regardless of how the competition turns out, I think you're building something valuable." When the judges returned from deliberation, the energy in the room was electric. Rebecca Martinez took the podium to announce the results, beginning with recognition for all finalists and acknowledgement of the high quality of presentations they had witnessed. "This year's competition was exceptionally strong," she began. "Each finalist presented a business plan that demonstrated genuine market opportunity and thoughtful execution strategy. The judging was difficult because we saw multiple ventures with significant potential for success." She announced the third-place winner first, Marcus Williams and his AI tutoring platform. The second-place winner was Sarah Kim with her food waste reduction app. Both were excellent projects that I could easily imagine succeeding in the marketplace. "This year's Innovation Challenge winner represents the best combination of market opportunity, execution readiness, and potential for both financial and social impact," Rebecca Martinez continued. "The winning venture addresses a clear market need with a defensible business model and has already demonstrated early validation through customer feedback and pilot testing." I felt my heart beating faster, but I tried to maintain realistic expectations. All the finalists had been strong, and I knew that multiple factors beyond just presentation quality would influence the judges' decision. The winner of this year's Northwestern Innovation Challenge is Maya Chen and EcoConnect. The announcement felt surreal. I heard applause and congratulations from other finalists, but it took a moment for the reality to sink in. I had won. EcoConnect had been selected as the most promising student venture by judges who understood entrepreneurship and innovation. More importantly, I would receive $50,000 in funding, a year of office space in the Innovation Center, and mentorship from successful entrepreneurs who could help me turn EcoConnect from a business plan into an actual company. As I walked to the front of the hall to accept the award, I caught sight of Dr. Sullivan again. His expression was no longer unreadable. He looked genuinely surprised and perhaps even impressed. For a brief moment, our eyes met across the room, and I wondered if he was reconsidering his assessment of my business potential. The award ceremony continued with comments from Dean Brooks about the quality of student entrepreneurship at Northwestern and the university's commitment to supporting innovation. During her remarks, she mentioned that the Board of Trustees had been so impressed with this year's competition that they were considering expanding support for student ventures. In particular, Dean Brooks announced, the board has asked the Innovation Challenge winner to present their business plan to the full Board of Trustees at next month's quarterly meeting. This represents an unprecedented opportunity for a student venture to gain visibility and potential support from university leadership. The announcement that I would be presenting to the Board of Trustees felt like the perfect culmination of a journey that had begun with Dr. Sullivan's harsh criticism. I would be returning to face some of the same people who had witnessed my humiliation, but this time I would be presenting as the winner of a competitive innovation challenge, rather than as a student whose professor had declared her business plan embarrassing and unrealistic. After the ceremony, I was surrounded by congratulations from fellow students, faculty members, and business leaders who had attended the event. Professor Wong was beaming with pride, having watched one of her mentees achieve recognition for work they had developed together. The validation felt incredible, but what meant the most was knowing that EcoConnect would now have the resources and support needed to become a real business. As the crowd began to thin out, Dr. Sullivan approached me. I wasn't sure what to expect from our first direct conversation since that morning in his classroom. "Congratulations, Maya," he said, his tone more subdued than I had ever heard from him. "Your presentation today was quite impressive. You've clearly done significant work to develop your business concept since our class." I studied his face, trying to read his expression. There was something that might have been regret, or perhaps just recognition that his initial assessment had been wrong. "Thank you, Dr. Sullivan," I replied, keeping my tone professional but not particularly warm. I appreciate you taking the time to attend today's competition. He seemed to want to say something more, but after a moment of hesitation, he simply nodded and walked away. I watched him leave, realizing that his opinion no longer carried the weight it once had. The market had spoken through judges who understood innovation, customers who were willing to pay for EcoConnect services, and investors who saw genuine business potential. That evening, I called my parents to share the news about winning the Innovation Challenge. Their excitement and pride were overwhelming. But what touched me most was my mother's comment that she had never doubted EcoConnect would succeed. "You've always been able to see opportunities that other people miss," she told me. "I'm not surprised that it took other people longer to recognize what you were building." As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about how much had changed since Dr. Sullivan's brutal assessment of my business plan. His attempt to crush my confidence had inadvertently launched a journey that led to validation from exactly the people whose opinions actually mattered in the entrepreneurial world. The presentation to the Board of Trustees would be my opportunity to complete that journey, demonstrating not just that EcoConnect was a viable business, but that the student Dr. Sullivan had dismissed as lacking business acumen was actually an entrepreneur capable of building something valuable and sustainable. More than vindication, though, I was excited about the opportunity to turn EcoConnect from a competition-winning business plan into a platform that could actually help students find meaningful work while supporting businesses that were working to create a more sustainable future. The validation was nice, but the real impact would come from building something that made a difference in the world. Looking ahead to the board presentation, I felt ready to show not just Dr. Sullivan, but everyone who had ever underestimated student entrepreneurship what was possible when innovative ideas received the support and encouragement they deserved, rather than dismissive criticism designed to discourage ambition. The Northwestern Board of Trustees meeting was scheduled for the third Thursday of March, and I had been preparing for this moment with an intensity that consumed my thoughts from the moment I woke up until I finally fell asleep each night. The executive conference room where the meeting would take place was located on the 15th floor of the administration building, a space I had never imagined entering except perhaps as part of a campus tour group. The room commanded an unobstructed view of Lake Michigan, with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the space in natural light even on overcast Chicago days. The conference table was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, constructed from rich walnut wood that had been polished to a mirror finish, and reflected the recessed lighting fixtures overhead. 24 leather chairs surrounded the table, each one representing serious money and important decisions that shaped the direction of the university. The walls were lined with portraits of previous board chairs and university presidents, creating an atmosphere of academic tradition mixed with corporate authority that was both inspiring and intimidating. I had spent the previous month refining every aspect of my presentation with Professor Wong, who had become not just a mentor but a strategic advisor whose feedback had transformed EcoConnect from a promising student idea into a sophisticated business proposition. We had rehearsed potential questions until I could respond to even the most challenging inquiries without hesitation. Every slide had been scrutinized, every financial projection verified, every market assumption tested against real-world data. This presentation represented far more than just another opportunity to share my business plan. It was the culmination of a journey that had begun with Dr. Sullivan's brutal public criticism and evolved into validation from exactly the kind of sophisticated business leaders whose opinions actually mattered in the entrepreneurial world. The irony that Dr. Sullivan would be present in the room, watching me present the same basic concept he had so harshly dismissed, was not lost on me. The stakes could not have been higher. The Board of Trustees represented the ultimate authority at Northwestern University, comprising successful executives, prominent alumni, respected academics, and community leaders who controlled substantial resources and wielded influence that extended far beyond the campus boundaries. Their endorsement of EcoConnect could provide not just financial support, but access to networks and opportunities that would accelerate the platform's growth beyond anything I could achieve through normal entrepreneurial channels. I arrived at the administration building 90 minutes before the scheduled presentation time, using the extra time to familiarize myself with the conference room setup and test every piece of audiovisual equipment that I would be using. The technical infrastructure was more sophisticated than anything I had encountered during my academic career, featuring multiple high-resolution displays, wireless presentation capabilities, and professional lighting that would make even the most basic PowerPoint slides look polished and authoritative. Dean Brooks had arranged for me to have access to the room for setup and rehearsal, understanding that technical difficulties could derail even the most compelling content. I connected my laptop to the presentation system, checked the wireless remote functionality, and ran through my opening slides to ensure that transitions would be smooth and professional. The investment in preparation time felt crucial, because I knew that any technical hiccup would detract from the substance of what I was presenting. As board members began arriving for the 10 o'clock meeting, I was struck by the caliber of people taking their seats around the magnificent conference table. Margaret Foster, the board chair, was a former CEO of a Fortune 500 manufacturing company who now served on the boards of 3 major corporations and 2 prominent charitable foundations. Her reputation in the Chicago business community was legendary, built on decades of strategic decision-making and successful leadership during multiple economic cycles. Robert Kim occupied the seat to Foster's right, representing the venture capital community that had become increasingly important to Northwestern's entrepreneurship initiatives. His firm, Midwest Ventures, had invested in more than 40 startups over the past decade, with several achieving valuations exceeding $1 billion. His presence at the meeting suggested that the board was serious about understanding EcoConnect's commercial potential, rather than just treating it as an academic exercise. Dr. Elizabeth Martinez sat across from Kim, bringing the academic perspective that balanced the board's business focus. As a former dean at 3 major universities and current professor emeritus at Northwestern's Business School, she understood both the theoretical frameworks that informed entrepreneurship education and the practical challenges of translating classroom learning into real-world business success. Other board members included Sarah Chen, founder of a successful technology consulting firm, Michael Thompson, senior partner at one of Chicago's largest law firms, Jennifer Walsh, president of a sustainable development organization, and David Rodriguez, who had built and sold 2 companies in the renewable energy sector. The diversity of expertise represented around the table meant that EcoConnect would be evaluated from multiple perspectives, each bringing different criteria for assessing business potential. Dean Brooks took her customary seat at the side of the room, where university administrators typically sat when presenting to the board. She had become one of my strongest advocates within the academic administration, and her presence provided reassurance that I had institutional support for what I was about to present. Her encouragement had been crucial during the months when I was rebuilding my confidence after Dr. Sullivan's harsh critique. Dr. Sullivan entered the conference room precisely at 10 o'clock, as the meeting was being called to order. He took a seat along the side wall with other faculty members who were present for various agenda items throughout the morning. His presence created a tension that I felt in my stomach, though I had worked hard to prepare mentally for this moment. The man who had publicly declared my business plan unrealistic and embarrassing would be watching me present that same concept to the university's most influential decision-makers. Margaret Foster called the meeting to order, with the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to running important gatherings. The board moved quickly through several routine agenda items, including budget approvals, facility updates, and academic program reviews. I used this time to observe the dynamics around the table, noting how members interacted with each other and what types of questions they typically asked during discussions. When my agenda item was reached, Foster's introduction was both generous and substantive. As you know, Northwestern has made significant investments in student entrepreneurship and innovation over the past several years, she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in executive leadership roles. These investments have been designed to foster the kind of innovative thinking that will serve our students well in an increasingly dynamic economy. She gestured toward me with a smile that seemed genuinely warm rather than merely polite. Today we have the opportunity to hear from Maya Chen, winner of this year's Innovation Challenge, about her venture EcoConnect. This presentation represents exactly the kind of outcome we hoped to achieve when we expanded our commitment to student entrepreneurship. Maya's venture has attracted considerable attention from both the academic and business communities, and I believe you'll find her presentation both informative and impressive. The introduction provided context that made me feel like a legitimate business presenter rather than a student seeking approval from authority figures. I moved to the front of the room with confidence that had been earned through months of market validation, customer feedback, and continuous refinement of my business model. The presentation I was about to deliver represented not just my current understanding of EcoConnect, but the culmination of everything I had learned about entrepreneurship, strategic planning, and market analysis since that devastating morning in Dr. Sullivan's classroom. Thank you, Board Chair Foster, and thank you all for the opportunity to share EcoConnect with you today, I began, making deliberate eye contact with members around the table. 9 months ago, I identified a significant inefficiency in the employment marketplace that was preventing environmentally conscious students from connecting with sustainable businesses that shared their values. Today I'm excited to present EcoConnect, a platform that has evolved from a student concept to a viable business that's generating revenue, attracting investment interest, and creating measurable social impact. I clicked to my opening slide, which displayed metrics from the pilot program that had grown substantially since my Innovation Challenge presentation. The numbers represented real performance rather than theoretical projections, giving my presentation immediate credibility with business leaders who understood the difference between plans and execution. EcoConnect currently serves 63 sustainable businesses and over 425 students across the Chicago metropolitan area, I continued, allowing the scope of our growth to register with the audience. Our platform has facilitated 203 successful placements in the past 6 months, with an average retention rate of 91% after 6 months of employment. Perhaps more importantly for the businesses we serve, employees hired through EcoConnect demonstrate 43% higher engagement scores and 28% longer tenure compared to hires from traditional recruitment channels. I could see genuine interest around the table as board members absorbed the data I was presenting. These were people who spent their professional lives evaluating business performance, and they could recognize strong metrics when they encountered them. The validation felt fundamentally different from academic feedback because these decision-makers dealt with actual market outcomes rather than theoretical frameworks. Robert Kim leaned forward slightly, his expression indicating the kind of attention that venture capitalists give to presentations that exceed their expectations. Sarah Chen was taking notes on her tablet, suggesting that the technology aspects of EcoConnect had captured her interest. David Rodriguez nodded approvingly when I mentioned the retention rates for sustainable business employees, reflecting his own experience in the renewable energy sector. The market analysis section of my presentation had evolved dramatically since my original work in Dr. Sullivan's class. I now had access to proprietary research from major consulting firms, detailed competitor analysis based on actual market interactions, and financial data from businesses that were paying substantial monthly fees for EcoConnect services. The picture that emerged was of a substantial and rapidly growing market opportunity that existing platforms were serving inadequately. The sustainable employment market represents a $2.7 billion opportunity in the United States, growing at 19% annually according to the latest research from McKinsey & Company, I explained, referencing industry reports that hadn't been available when I first conceived EcoConnect. Traditional recruitment platforms like LinkedIn and Indeed optimize for volume and speed of placement, but sustainable businesses need employees who genuinely understand and embrace their environmental mission. EcoConnect optimizes for values alignment and cultural fit, creating superior outcomes for both employers and job seekers. I clicked to a slide that displayed detailed comparison charts showing placement success rates, employee retention, and customer satisfaction scores for EcoConnect versus traditional recruitment channels. The data was compelling because it came from actual customers who had used both approaches and could speak to the differences in results. Sustainable businesses that use EcoConnect report 67% higher satisfaction with new hires compared to employees recruited through general-purpose platforms, I continued. This isn't just about finding people who care about the environment. It's about finding people who understand that sustainability requires different approaches to business operations, customer engagement, and long-term planning. Dr. Martinez raised her hand to ask the first question, and I was pleased that it came from the academic perspective, because it allowed me to demonstrate how EcoConnect connected classroom learning with real-world application. Maya, can you elaborate on how your platform addresses the skills gap that many sustainable businesses report when hiring recent graduates? The question was exactly the type one had hoped to receive because it showcased one of EcoConnect's key differentiators from traditional recruitment platforms. That's an excellent question, Dr. Martinez. One of the unique features of EcoConnect is our skills development component, which we launched 3 months ago, based on feedback from business customers. Students on our platform can access specialized training modules covering topics like life cycle assessment, sustainable supply chain management, and environmental impact measurement. I clicked to a slide showing the curriculum we had developed in partnership with Northwestern's Environmental Science and Business departments. We've partnered with faculty experts to create practical training that bridges the gap between academic sustainability concepts and real business applications. Students who complete these modules receive certification that's recognized by our business partners, and they consistently perform better in their positions than hires from traditional channels. The skills development component had been inspired by conversations with business owners who were frustrated with the gap between what students learned in environmental studies classes and what they needed to know to contribute effectively in sustainable business settings. By addressing this gap directly, EcoConnect had differentiated itself from simple job boards and created additional value for both students and employers. Robert Kim followed up with the type of detailed financial question that I had been anticipating from someone with his venture capital background. Maya, I'm impressed with your growth metrics, but I'd like to understand the unit economics in more detail. Can you walk us through your customer acquisition costs, lifetime value calculations, and the scalability of your current business model? This was the moment I had been preparing for most intensively with Professor Wong, who had insisted that I master every aspect of EcoConnect's financial performance. Absolutely, Mr. Kim. Our current customer acquisition cost for businesses is $340, which includes both digital marketing and direct sales efforts. Average customer lifetime value is $3,200, giving us an LTV to CAC ratio of 9.4 to 1, which compares favorably to industry benchmarks for B2B SaaS platforms. I advanced to a detailed financial slide that broke down our revenue streams and cost structure. Our revenue model includes monthly subscription fees ranging from $89 for small businesses to $449 for enterprise customers, plus success fees for premium placements and consulting services. Current monthly recurring revenue is $26,800, growing at 23% month over month, with gross margins of 89% and customer churn rates below 3% annually. The financial metrics were strong enough to command respect from experienced business leaders, but I knew that Robert Kim would want to understand the scalability factors that would determine EcoConnect's long-term potential. The beauty of our model is that network effects strengthen our competitive position as we grow. Each new business customer makes the platform more attractive to students, and each new student makes the platform more valuable to businesses. We're approaching the tipping point, where growth becomes self-reinforcing. Sarah Chen raised her hand to ask about the technology infrastructure that supported EcoConnect's operations. As someone who had built her own technology consulting firm, she understood the importance of robust systems for scaling platform businesses. Maya, can you describe your technology architecture and how you plan to handle the technical challenges of expansion to new markets? I was grateful that Professor Wong had insisted I develop deep expertise in the technical aspects of platform businesses, working with several Northwestern computer science students to understand the infrastructure requirements for scaling EcoConnect effectively. Our platform is built on a cloud-native architecture using microservices that can scale independently based on demand. We use machine learning algorithms to improve matching between students and opportunities, and our mobile-first design ensures accessibility across all device types. I clicked to a slide showing our technology roadmap and the partnerships we had established with technology vendors to support expansion. We've designed the system to handle geographic expansion efficiently, with localization features for different markets and integration capabilities for regional business networks. Our current infrastructure can support 10x growth without significant additional investment. The technology discussion led naturally into questions about competitive positioning and barriers to entry, which came from Michael Thompson, whose legal background made him particularly focused on intellectual property and competitive moats. Maya, how do you plan to defend your market position against larger competitors who might try to replicate your approach? This question allowed me to discuss one of EcoConnect's most important strategic advantages, which was the community aspect that would be difficult for larger platforms to replicate authentically. Our primary competitive moat is the trust and engagement we've built within the sustainability community. Students and businesses choose EcoConnect not just because of our features, but because they believe in our mission and values. That's much harder to replicate than technology or business model. I explained how EcoConnect had become more than just a recruitment platform, evolving into a community hub where students and business owners shared resources, collaborated on projects, and supported each other's sustainability initiatives. We host monthly networking events, provide educational content about sustainability careers, and facilitate mentorship relationships between experienced professionals and students. This community engagement creates switching costs that go beyond simple platform functionality. Jennifer Walsh, whose background in sustainable development gave her unique insight into EcoConnect's market positioning, asked about our social impact measurement and reporting capabilities. Maya, can you quantify the environmental benefits that EcoConnect placements have generated, and how do you plan to scale those impact measurements? This was one of my favorite questions because it highlighted the aspect of EcoConnect that I was most passionate about and that differentiated us most clearly from traditional business ventures. We've developed comprehensive impact tracking in partnership with Northwestern's Environmental Science Department, allowing us to measure the concrete environmental benefits created by our placements. I advanced to a slide displaying impressive environmental impact metrics that we had been tracking since the platform launch. EcoConnect placements have directly contributed to the reduction of 1,247 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions, diversion of 34,600 pounds of waste from landfills, and adoption of renewable energy systems with 1.8 megawatts of total capacity. These aren't theoretical projections. They're measured outcomes from the work our place students have performed at sustainable businesses. The impact measurement had required developing sophisticated tracking systems and partnerships with environmental monitoring organizations. But it provided EcoConnect with a unique selling proposition that resonated strongly with both students and businesses in the sustainability space. As we scale, these impact metrics become increasingly important for attracting values-driven customers and for securing funding from impact investors who require measurable social and environmental returns. David Rodriguez, whose renewable energy background made him particularly interested in our impact measurement, asked a follow-up question about scaling these benefits to national markets. Maya, have you modeled the potential environmental impact if EcoConnect achieves significant market penetration across multiple university markets? The question allowed me to present projections that demonstrated EcoConnect's potential to create substantial positive environmental impact while building a profitable business. Our conservative projections suggest that national expansion to 50 university markets could facilitate 15,000 annual placements, generating environmental benefits equivalent to removing 8,500 cars from the road for a full year. The optimistic scenario, based on faster adoption rates, could double those impacts. These projections were based on detailed modeling that Professor Wong and I had developed, with input from environmental science faculty and consulting firms that specialized in sustainability metrics. The numbers were conservative but compelling, suggesting that EcoConnect could generate meaningful environmental benefits while achieving strong financial performance. The presentation continued for 35 minutes, covering every aspect of EcoConnect's business model, competitive strategy, growth plans, and social impact potential. I fielded questions about partnership opportunities, regulatory considerations, international expansion possibilities, and potential exit strategies. Each question received a detailed, well-researched response that demonstrated depth of knowledge and serious strategic thinking. What impressed me most about the board's engagement was the sophistication of their questions and their genuine interest in understanding how EcoConnect could succeed in competitive markets. These weren't people trying to find flaws in my business plan or discourage my entrepreneurial ambitions. They were experienced leaders who recognized a promising opportunity and wanted to understand how Northwestern could support its development most effectively. Margaret Foster opened the floor for broader discussion about EcoConnect and Northwestern's role in supporting student entrepreneurship after the formal presentation concluded. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I had experienced in any academic setting, feeling more like a strategic planning session with experienced advisors than a student presentation to authority figures. Maya, this represents exactly the kind of venture we hoped to see when we made substantial investments in the Innovation Center and expanded our entrepreneurship curriculum, Foster began, her tone conveying genuine enthusiasm rather than polite encouragement. You've demonstrated that Northwestern students can develop businesses that combine strong financial fundamentals with measurable social impact, which aligns perfectly with our institutional values and strategic objectives. Robert Kim nodded in strong agreement, his expression suggesting the kind of genuine interest that venture capitalists reserve for presentations that exceed their expectations. I'm impressed not just with the business concept and market opportunity, but with the sophistication of your execution and the quality of your performance metrics. The financial modeling, market analysis, and operational results you've presented are at a level one typically see from entrepreneurs who have been operating successful businesses for several years. Dr. Martinez added her perspective from the academic side, emphasizing how EcoConnect represented the kind of applied learning that universities should be fostering across all programs. What's particularly encouraging about Maya's presentation is how effectively she's integrated classroom learning with real-world market validation. This represents exactly the kind of experiential education we want to expand throughout the university, where students test theoretical concepts against actual market conditions. Sarah Chen observed that EcoConnect's technology approach demonstrated sophisticated understanding of platform business models and network effects. The technical architecture you've described shows real insight into the scalability challenges that platform businesses face. Your approach to building network effects and defending against larger competitors suggests strategic thinking that goes well beyond typical student projects. The board discussion continued for another 20 minutes, with members sharing observations about EcoConnect's potential and Northwestern's broader commitment to supporting student innovation. I felt like I was participating in a high-level business strategy session, rather than defending an academic project, which represented a remarkable transformation from the environment where EcoConnect had originated under Dr. Sullivan's harsh critique. Michael Thompson raised an important point about Northwestern's ability to support EcoConnect's growth beyond traditional academic boundaries. Maya, have you considered how the university might partner with EcoConnect as you expand to new markets? Northwestern has alumni networks and business relationships in many markets that could accelerate your growth significantly. The question opened a discussion about innovative partnerships between the university and student ventures that could benefit both parties. I explained that several other universities had already expressed interest in hosting EcoConnect programs, and that Northwestern's endorsement could provide credibility that would accelerate expansion efforts. Jennifer Walsh suggested that EcoConnect's impact measurement capabilities could position Northwestern as a leader in sustainability education and research. The environmental impact tracking you've developed could become a model for measuring the real-world outcomes of sustainability education programs. This could enhance Northwestern's reputation in the growing field of impact measurement. As the formal meeting portion concluded, several board members approached me individually to continue conversations about EcoConnect's development and their potential personal involvement in supporting the venture's growth. Robert Kim handed me his business card and mentioned that his venture capital firm would be very interested in participating in EcoConnect's next funding round, particularly given the strong unit economics and growth trajectory we had demonstrated. Margaret Foster suggested connecting me with Northwestern alumni who had built successful platform businesses and could provide strategic guidance as EcoConnect expanded to new markets. We have several alumni who've navigated the challenges of scaling marketplace businesses who would be excellent advisors for your venture. I'll make those introductions personally. Dr. Martinez expressed interest in developing a comprehensive case study about EcoConnect for use in entrepreneurship and sustainability courses across the university. Your venture represents an excellent example of how academic concepts can be applied to create real business value while generating measurable social impact. This could become a cornerstone case study for our expanded entrepreneurship curriculum. David Rodriguez mentioned that his renewable energy industry connections could provide valuable partnerships as EcoConnect expanded into new sustainability sectors. There's growing demand for talented young professionals across all areas of the clean economy. EcoConnect could play an important role in addressing that talent gap while supporting the growth of sustainable businesses. Sarah Chen offered to introduce me to technology entrepreneurs in her network who had experience scaling platform businesses and could provide technical guidance as EcoConnect's user base expanded. The technical challenges of scaling marketplace platforms are well understood, but they require expertise from people who've navigated those challenges successfully. As board members gradually filed out of the conference room, Dr. Sullivan remained seated along the side wall, apparently waiting for an opportunity to speak with me privately. I had wondered throughout the presentation what he was thinking, as he watched the student he had tried to discourage receive enthusiastic support and genuine offers of assistance from the university's most influential leaders. When the room had cleared except for the two of us and a few remaining university staff members, Dr. Sullivan approached slowly, his expression more subdued and uncertain than I had ever seen from him in any academic setting. The confident authority he typically projected in classroom environments was replaced by something that looked like genuine discomfort, or perhaps regret about his previous behavior. "Maya," he began, his voice quieter and less authoritative than I remembered from our classroom interactions. "I wanted to speak with you privately about what happened in my class last semester, and about the remarkable presentation you just delivered to the board." I waited silently, curious to hear what he might say, but not particularly interested in making the conversation easier for him. The months that had passed since his brutal public critique had given me perspective on his motivations and limitations, but they hadn't erased the memory of being humiliated in front of my classmates and distinguished guests for proposing ideas that were now receiving serious consideration from successful business leaders. "I owe you a sincere and comprehensive apology," he continued, the words seeming genuinely difficult for him to speak. "My response to your original presentation was unprofessional, inappropriate, and as today's session has clearly demonstrated, completely wrong about both the quality of your business concept and your capabilities as an entrepreneur. I allowed my own biases and preconceptions to influence my assessment of your work in a way that was unfair to you and entirely inappropriate for an educator." The apology was more extensive and heartfelt than I had expected, but I remained cautious about how to respond. Dr. Sullivan's acknowledgement of his mistake was personally satisfying, but it didn't change the fact that his initial reaction had been designed to humiliate me and crush my entrepreneurial confidence, rather than provide constructive feedback that would help me improve my work. "I appreciate you acknowledging that, Dr. Sullivan," I replied carefully, keeping my tone professional but not particularly warm. "Your critique was certainly challenging, and it ultimately led me to seek feedback and validation from people who understood the market I was trying to serve. In some ways, your reaction helped me find the mentorship and support I needed to develop EcoConnect more thoroughly than I might have otherwise." He nodded slowly, perhaps recognizing that my diplomatic response contained an implicit criticism of his teaching approach and professional judgment. "You've clearly done remarkable work to develop this business concept and build actual market traction. The presentation you gave today was sophisticated, compelling, and far beyond what I typically see from student ventures, even at the graduate level." We continued talking for several more minutes about EcoConnect's development and the lessons I had learned about entrepreneurship, market validation, and building sustainable businesses. Dr. Sullivan seemed genuinely interested in understanding how I had transformed his harsh assessment into motivation for building a stronger business plan, though I suspected his curiosity was partly motivated by a desire to improve his own approach to evaluating student work. "May I ask what specific aspects of my original presentation triggered such a negative reaction?" I inquired, curious to understand his mindset during that devastating classroom session. The board members who observed both presentations seemed to see continuity between my original concept and today's version, even though I've obviously refined and expanded the business model significantly. Dr. Sullivan paused for a long moment, apparently considering how honest to be about his motivations and thought processes. "I think what I failed to recognize in your original presentation was that you weren't just proposing a feel-good social venture disguised as a business plan. You were identifying a genuine market inefficiency and proposing an innovative solution that could generate both financial returns and social impact." He continued with an admission that surprised me with its level of self-awareness. "My experience in traditional staffing and recruitment made me instinctively skeptical of disruption to established business models. I was evaluating your proposal through the lens of how we did things at Meridian Corp, rather than considering whether new approaches might be more effective in serving evolving market needs." The reference to his previous corporate experience provided context that helped me understand his initial reaction to EcoConnect. As someone who had spent over a decade in traditional recruitment services, he would naturally be resistant to innovations that challenged the industry where he had built his career and expertise. I also think I was concerned about students pursuing what I perceived as idealistic ventures that might not prepare them for the realities of competitive business environments, he continued. "But watching your presentation today and seeing the validation you've received from experienced business leaders has made me reconsider whether I was protecting students from valuable learning experiences." The conversation revealed a level of introspection that I hadn't expected from Dr. Sullivan, suggesting that watching EcoConnect receive strong endorsement from respected business leaders had forced him to examine not just his assessment of my work, but his broader approach to evaluating student innovation and entrepreneurship. Your success with EcoConnect has taught me something important about the difference between academic critique and market validation, he admitted. I was focusing on potential weaknesses in your business plan, but the market has responded to the strengths and opportunities you identified. That's a valuable lesson for me as an educator. As our conversation concluded, Dr. Sullivan made an observation that I found surprisingly insightful. I think what I failed to appreciate about your original presentation was that you had done genuine market research and identified real customer needs. I was so focused on challenging your assumptions that I didn't adequately consider the evidence you had gathered to support your conclusions. The admission suggested that his harsh critique had been based more on reflexive skepticism than careful analysis of the market research and customer validation I had presented. This realization didn't excuse his unprofessional behavior, but it helped me understand why someone with his background might have misunderstood what I was proposing. Walking across campus. After the board meeting and conversation with Dr. Sullivan, I felt a profound sense of completion and vindication that went beyond simple satisfaction about proving him wrong. The student who had been told she lacked fundamental business acumen was now operating a thriving business that had attracted serious interest from venture capitalists, enthusiastic endorsement from university leadership, and offers of support from successful entrepreneurs. More importantly, the experience had taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, the importance of seeking feedback from relevant experts, and the difference between academic criticism and market validation. Dr. Sullivan's harsh critique had been devastating in the moment, but it had ultimately strengthened my commitment to EcoConnect and forced me to develop the business concept more rigorously than I might have otherwise. The real vindication wasn't Dr. Sullivan's apology or the board's enthusiastic response, though both were deeply satisfying. The real vindication was the growing platform that was actually helping hundreds of students find meaningful work while supporting dozens of businesses that were building a more sustainable future. EcoConnect had evolved from an academic exercise into a genuine business that was creating measurable value for real customers in competitive markets. Over the following days and weeks, multiple opportunities emerged directly from the board presentation that demonstrated the value of having presented to such an influential audience. Robert Kim's venture capital firm scheduled a comprehensive due diligence process to evaluate EcoConnect for Series A funding that could accelerate expansion to 12 new university markets over the next 18 months. Margaret Foster personally introduced me to 3 Northwestern alumni who had built successful platform businesses and were willing to serve as strategic advisors to EcoConnect. These introductions led to monthly advisory sessions that provided invaluable guidance on scaling challenges, competitive positioning, and strategic partnerships. Dr. Martinez followed through on her interest in developing a case study about EcoConnect, working with me to document the venture's development from student concept to viable business. The case study would be used in entrepreneurship courses across the university and potentially licensed to other business schools that wanted to teach about student innovation and market validation. David Rodriguez's connections in the renewable energy industry resulted in partnerships with 3 industry associations that agreed to promote EcoConnect to their member companies. These partnerships provided access to hundreds of potential business customers who were actively seeking environmentally conscious talent. Sarah Chen's technology network led to advisors who helped EcoConnect develop more sophisticated matching algorithms and mobile applications that improved user experience and engagement. The technical improvements increased customer satisfaction scores and retention rates across both student and business user segments. Perhaps most significantly, the board approved funding for a Northwestern Entrepreneur in Residence program that would allow me to defer graduation and work full-time on EcoConnect while maintaining access to university resources, mentorship, and facilities. The program represented exactly the kind of bridge between academic learning and real-world business development that I needed to scale the platform effectively. The Entrepreneur in Residence program included office space in the Innovation Center, access to university research resources, mentorship from faculty and alumni, and a modest stipend that would allow me to focus entirely on EcoConnect without financial stress. Most importantly, it provided institutional legitimacy that would be valuable when raising capital from investors and recruiting business partners. Professor Wong and I celebrated these developments over dinner at a restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan, the same view that had provided the backdrop for my board presentation. She was beaming with pride, not just because her mentee had achieved recognition, but because EcoConnect represented exactly the kind of student venture she had hoped to see when she joined Northwestern's faculty to promote entrepreneurship education. "You've accomplished something truly remarkable," she told me as we reviewed the various opportunities that had emerged from the board presentation. "You've built a business that combines strong financial fundamentals with genuine social impact. And you've demonstrated that student entrepreneurs can compete successfully at the highest levels when they receive appropriate support and encouragement." The contrast with Dr. Sullivan's initial assessment could not have been more dramatic or complete. Where he had seen naive idealism and fundamental misunderstanding of business principles, experienced entrepreneurs and investors saw innovative thinking, thorough market analysis, and strong execution capabilities. The difference wasn't in the quality of EcoConnect itself, but in the perspective and expertise of the people evaluating it. As I prepared to transition from student to full-time entrepreneur, I reflected on the lessons that other students could learn from my experience with EcoConnect and the journey from devastating critique to board endorsement. The most important lesson was probably that harsh criticism from authority figures doesn't necessarily reflect the quality of your ideas or your potential for success. Sometimes it reflects their own limitations, biases, or resistance to approaches that challenge their experience and assumptions. The second crucial lesson was about the importance of seeking feedback and validation from people who understand the problems you're trying to solve and the markets you're trying to serve. Academic environments can be valuable for developing analytical skills and theoretical knowledge, but they don't always prepare you for the realities of building businesses that serve real customers in competitive markets. Most importantly, I had learned that entrepreneurship requires extraordinary resilience and persistence in the face of discouragement, particularly when that discouragement comes from people in positions of authority who should be providing encouragement and support. Dr. Sullivan's brutal critique could have ended my interest in building EcoConnect and pursuing entrepreneurship generally, but instead it motivated me to prove that the business concept had genuine merit and market potential. The validation from customers, investors, and business leaders was more meaningful because I had worked to earn it through market testing and continuous improvement, rather than receiving it easily through academic approval. The journey from Dr. Sullivan's classroom to the Board of Trustees had required developing real business skills, building actual customer relationships, and demonstrating measurable results in competitive markets. 6 months after being told that I lacked fundamental business acumen and should consider switching academic majors, I was running a growing company that was generating substantial revenue, attracting serious investment interest, and creating measurable social impact. The transformation from humiliated student to successful entrepreneur hadn't happened overnight, but it had happened because I refused to accept one professor's biased assessment as the final word on my potential and capabilities. EcoConnect was now positioned to scale nationally and potentially internationally, with funding commitments that would allow expansion to 15 new university markets over the next 2 years. The platform that Dr. Sullivan had dismissed as unrealistic and poorly researched was becoming exactly what I had originally envisioned: a thriving community that connected passionate students with mission-driven businesses, while accelerating the transition to a more sustainable economy. The business metrics continued to improve month over month, with customer satisfaction scores above 90%, retention rates exceeding industry benchmarks, and financial performance that attracted interest from multiple venture capital firms. More importantly, the environmental impact metrics showed that EcoConnect was generating measurable benefits that justified the social mission that had motivated the venture from its inception. Looking back on the complete journey from that devastating classroom presentation to Board of Trustees endorsement, I realized that Dr. Sullivan's harsh critique had actually been an unexpected gift, though certainly not the kind he intended to provide. His attempt to crush my entrepreneurial confidence had forced me to develop the skills, knowledge, and resilience I needed to succeed in competitive markets while building meaningful relationships with mentors and advisors who understood innovation rather than feared it. Without his discouragement, I might never have sought the comprehensive mentorship from Professor Wong that had been crucial to EcoConnect's development. I might not have pursued the extensive market validation that had given me confidence in the business model and competitive positioning. I certainly wouldn't have developed the resilience and determination that had carried me through the inevitable challenges of building a business from scratch. The irony was profound and complete. Dr. Sullivan had tried to provide what he called a reality check that would redirect me toward more practical pursuits, But the reality was that innovative students with strong ideas and persistent execution could build businesses that created both substantial financial value and meaningful social impact. His attempt to discourage me had inadvertently provided exactly the motivation I needed to prove him completely wrong about both my capabilities and my business concept. As I packed up my materials from the board presentation and prepared to begin the next phase of EcoConnect's development, I smiled thinking about how dramatically Dr. Sullivan had underestimated both my business idea and my determination to succeed despite his opposition. He had tried to end my entrepreneurial aspirations with his harsh public criticism, but he had actually launched them into a trajectory that exceeded anything I had originally imagined possible. The vindication was complete and satisfying, but the real excitement came from knowing that EcoConnect was just beginning to realize its potential impact. The platform that had started as a student presentation was now positioned to help thousands of environmentally conscious students find meaningful careers while supporting the growth of sustainable businesses across multiple industries and geographic markets. The Board of Trustees had spoken clearly about EcoConnect's potential, and their verdict was exactly the opposite of what Dr. Sullivan had predicted about my business acumen and entrepreneurial capabilities. Sometimes the biggest obstacles become the most valuable opportunities, and sometimes the harshest critics inadvertently provide exactly the motivation you need to achieve success beyond their worst fears and highest expectations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.